A dropped satellite phone, an encrypted whisper from across the Atlantic, and for Clara Hale, a waitress treading water in an ocean of medical debt, the world was about to crack open. It was just another Wednesday at the Gilded Steer, a Chicago steakhouse where history clung to the dark wood panels like the scent of cigar smoke. She had no inkling she was about to become a fulcrum in a war of empires, a silent, brutal conflict fought not with soldiers, but with spreadsheets and whispers. In the space of a few hours, this 28-year-old woman, armed with a forgotten piece of technology and a mind forged in forgotten histories, would become the one person standing between a titan's legacy and total ruin. This isn't a story about magic or luck. This is the story of how a waitress who understood the secret language of the past answered a call from the future and saved the single most important contract of billionaire industrialist Julian Croft. The air in the Gilded Steer was a carefully curated symphony, the low murmur of powerful men making powerful deals, the civilized clink of heavy silverware on bone china, the discreet sizzle of prime cuts searing over open flames. For Clara Hale, it was the soundtrack of a life deferred. 5 years ago, she'd been the star of the University of Chicago's history department, her thesis on Cold War cryptography and steganography earning accolades from professors who saw a brilliant future for her in intelligence or academia. Then her grandfather, a retired Army signals analyst, and the man who had raised her, had been struck down by a series of debilitating strokes. The man who had taught her about Billionaire ciphers and one-time pads now struggled to form sentences. His savings, meticulously accrued over a lifetime of service, evaporated against the relentless onslaught of medical costs. Clara had traded dusty archives for prime rib, her dissertation on Soviet dead drops for a dissertation on the daily specials. Her grandfather, Arthur, was the anchor of her world, the flicker of recognition in his eyes when she'd visit him at the long-term care facility, the way his hand would tighten on hers. That was the fuel that propelled her through 16-hour double shifts. But the cost of that care was a ravenous beast, and Clara was feeding it her future, one meager tip at a time. She moved through the restaurant with a quiet, almost invisible grace, her memory for orders and faces as sharp as the crease in a banker's trousers. She observed things, the subtle tells of a bluff during a negotiation in booth 4, the way a junior associate's hands would tremble when pouring wine for his boss. She was a ghost, a silent witness to the machinations of a world she was no longer a part of. At precisely 8:15 p.m., the heavy oak door swung open, admitting a man who seemed to bend the room's gravity around him. He wasn't just wealthy, he was substantial, built of something denser than the men around him. His hair was the color of iron filings, his suit a severe charcoal gray that looked like it had been custom molded to his broad shoulders. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, swept the room not with arrogance, but with the weary, all-encompassing gaze of a general surveying his battlefield. This was Julian Croft, founder and CEO of Sterling Forge Industries, a name synonymous with American steel, concrete, and sheer industrial might. Though Clara, of course, did not know his name. To her, he was simply Booth 12. The man trailing in his wake was a stark contrast. Arthur Finch was younger, leaner, and radiated an anxiety so palpable it was practically a cologne. His fingers drummed a frantic, nervous tattoo on the polished surface of his briefcase as he slid into the booth opposite his boss. "It is done, Arthur." Croft's voice was a low rumble, like distant machinery, effortlessly cutting through the restaurant's genteel hum. "The final schematics were approved by Muller's team this morning. All that remains is the ink. Herr Schmidt is a man of honor, Julian, but he is meticulous." "A traditionalist," Finch replied, loosening a tie that already seemed to be strangling him. "Until his signature is on that contract, Project Helios is just $100 billion fantasy. The moment it's signed, Sterling Forge doesn't just build a high-speed rail network across the Midwest. We redefine American infrastructure for the next century. It will not fall through," Croft stated, the finality in his tone as solid as a steel girder. "Muller Stahl needs our logistical network and our domestic production capacity as much as we need their proprietary magnetic levitation technology. It is a perfect fusion of German engineering and American will." Clara approached the table, her notepad in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen." Can I get you something to start with? Her voice was a practiced, placid melody, a calm surface over the churning exhaustion beneath. They ordered scotch, a Macallan 25 for Croft, a club soda for the nervous Finch, and two filet mignons, rare. They were there to celebrate, but their conversation remained clipped, focused, a low thrum of terms Clara vaguely understood from a world she used to study: geotechnical surveys, stress testing algorithms, metallurgical integrity. Then, midway through their meal, Finch's satellite phone, a bulky, serious-looking device resting on the table, buzzed with a harsh, insistent vibration. He glanced at the screen, and a wave of raw panic washed over his face, erasing what little composure he had left. "It's the clinic. My wife. I have to take this." He stood so abruptly he nearly sent his water glass tumbling. "Handle it," Croft said, his gaze not wavering from his plate. He was a man who did not suffer distractions gladly. Finch rushed toward the exit, his voice a desperate whisper into the phone. A few minutes later, he returned, his face the color of ash. "I have to go. There's a complication with my daughter's treatment." Croft was already on his feet, placing a stack of crisp $100 bills on the table that could have covered Clara's rent for the month. "Go," he commanded, the single word a dismissal and a permission all at once. They departed as they had arrived, two sharks returning to the deep, leaving behind a half-finished meal and an air of immense, unseen weight. Clara cleared the table, the generous tip a small, welcome balm on the raw wound of her financial worries. She wiped down the rich mahogany, her mind already shifting to the next table, the next order, the endless, grinding rhythm of the night. She didn't see it at first. Lying on the dark leather of the banquette, almost perfectly camouflaged, was the bulky black satellite phone, a silent, forgotten tether to $100 billion world. For the next hour, the phone lay dormant, a black brick of latent power. The dinner rush crested and began to ebb, replaced by the quieter, more intimate pace of late-evening diners nursing their brandy. Clara was polishing wine glasses at the service bar when a strange electronic chirp cut through the ambiance. It wasn't the familiar ringtone of a commercial smartphone. It was a sterile, functional sound, a sound meant for function, not frivolity. Clara traced the noise back to booth 12. There it was, Finch's phone. The small monochrome screen was illuminated, displaying a long string of digits preceded by a +49 country code, Germany. Below the number in stark block letters was the name Greta Adler. Her training, her entire instinct as a service worker, screamed at her to ignore it. It wasn't her phone. It wasn't her business. The restaurant manager, a perpetually harried man named Dominic, had a policy carved in stone. Lost items went into the safe, untouched. Answering a customer's phone was the cardinal sin, a violation of privacy that could get you fired on the spot. The phone stopped its chirping, the screen going dark. Relief washed through her. She picked it up, its weight surprising, intending to take it directly to Dominic's office. But as she held it, the device vibrated to life once more. Greta Adler was calling again, insistent. Clara hesitated, her hand frozen in midair. A call from Germany at this hour. It would be the middle of the night there. It had to be critical. The image of Arthur Finch's terrified face flashed through her mind. What if this was the call he was waiting for? What if it was about his daughter's health? The thought twisted in her gut. Against the rules, against her manager's explicit command, against every instinct for self-preservation she had, she pressed the green accept button. "Hello," she said, her voice barely a whisper. A pause on the other end, then a woman's voice, crisp as autumn leaves, speaking flawless, sharply accented English. "I am attempting to reach Herr Arthur Finch. To whom am I speaking?" "Oh, my name is Clara. I'm a waitress at the Gilded Steer restaurant in Chicago. Mr. Finch was here. He must have left his phone." Another pause, this one longer, colder. Clara could hear the faint, ambient hum of a high-tech office in the background. The woman on the other end was clearly recalibrating, processing this bizarre, unprofessional interruption. "I see," the voice said, a sudden frost creeping into her tone. "That is most irregular. My name is Greta Adler. I am the chief aide to Herr Gunther Schmidt, chairman of Miller Stahl. The name clicked in Clara's memory. Miller, Schmidt. The name she had overheard from the imposing man, Julian Croft. This was not a personal call. This was the deal. Can you please take a message for Herr Finch? Greta continued, her voice now a rigid mask of professional formality. Of course, Clara said, instinctively grabbing a cocktail napkin and the pen from her apron pocket. Go ahead. Please inform Herr Finch, and by extension Herr Croft, that Chairman Schmidt has spent the evening reviewing a supplementary geotechnical report that was brought to his attention. There are grave inconsistencies. As a result, he is formally canceling the final signing ceremony scheduled for tomorrow morning at Ordo 900 Central European Time. Clara's pen stopped moving. The words hung in the air, each one a shard of ice. Grave inconsistencies. Canceling. She recalled the confidence in Croft's voice, the talk of $100 billion project, of redefining a century of infrastructure. Canceling, Clara echoed, her voice thin. I think there may be some mistake. They seemed so certain everything was in order. There is no mistake, Greta said, her voice sharp and absolute. Information has been presented to our chairman that calls the fundamental structural integrity of the entire Helios project into question. We cannot in good conscience attach the Miller-Stahl name to a venture that appears to be built on a foundation of professional negligence, at best. We consider this matter concluded. Please relay the message. The German word she might have used, Fahrlässigkeit, hung unspoken in the air. Goodbye. Before Clara could utter another word, the line went dead. She stood motionless in the center of the dining room, the satellite phone still pressed against her ear, the silence on the other end a roaring abyss. The ambient sounds of the restaurant, a low laugh from a nearby table, the clink of a fork, seemed to be coming from miles away. She looked down at the phone in her hand. This dense black object suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. A waitress, a history student who had traded ciphers for side salads, was holding the smoldering ruins of a $100 billion deal in her hand, and she was the only person on the entire continent who knew it had been destroyed. A cold, sharp panic, unlike anything she had ever felt, seized Clara by the throat. Her mind, the one that once effortlessly navigated the labyrinthine complexities of historical espionage, was now a maelstrom of frantic, desperate thoughts. She had to find them. She had to get this phone back to Arthur Finch, back to the formidable Julian Croft. She ran to the front of the restaurant, peering through the leaded glass windows onto the rain-slicked Chicago street. The avenue was a river of headlights, yellow cabs, and black town cars flowing past in an endless, anonymous stream. The two men were gone, absorbed back into the city's vast, unforgiving machine. Dominic, did you see which way the men from booth 12 went? She asked, her voice tight with an urgency that made the manager look up from his reservations book. Dominic grunted, adjusting his tie. Black Mercedes, S-Class, went north. What's the problem, Hale? You look like you've seen a ghost. An S-Class, of course. They weren't just men in suits. They were modern-day kings. Finding them in a city of millions would be impossible. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What could she do? Leave the phone with Dominic. He'd lock it in the safe, and the message, the world-altering message, would die with it until morning, by which point it would be an epitaph. Call the police about a lost phone? They'd tell her to drop it at the nearest precinct. She retreated to the employee locker room, a cramped, windowless space that smelled of bleach and old linen. She stared at the phone. It was locked. A complex passcode stood between her and any hope of contacting its owner. This was the precipice. To violate a stranger's privacy, to pry into their digital life, was a line she would never, ever cross. But Greta Adler's cold, final words echoed in her mind. We consider this matter concluded. She thought of Julian Croft's powerful presence, the sense that he was a man who built things that lasted, and she thought of it all crumbling to dust because of a misunderstanding. Taking a ragged breath, she began to think. She wasn't a hacker, she was a historian. She looked for patterns, for the human element behind the machine. Finch was a creature of intense stress and habit. His passcode wouldn't be random. It would be something ingrained, muscle memory. She closed her eyes, replaying the scene at the table. He hadn't been tapping his fingers. He had been doodling on a napkin while Croft talked. A series of small, repetitive, geometric shapes. A triangle, a square, another triangle. What did it mean? It was a dead end. Then her eyes fell to the phone case. It was simple, functional black plastic, but on the back, almost worn away, was a small, embossed crest. She didn't recognize it at first. She took out her own cracked smartphone and, with trembling fingers, Googled prestigious East Coast University crests. It took her a few minutes of scrolling through Ivy League shields and liberal arts college logos before she found it. Wesleyan University, Arthur Finch's alma mater. What would a history or classics major from Wesleyan know? Her own academic passions surged to the forefront. It wouldn't be a birthday. It wouldn't be 1234. It would be something meaningful to a man of his background. She searched Wesleyan University famous alumni. Nothing clicked. Then, Wesleyan University History Department. A course listing from 20 years ago popped up. Hist. 2 or 18, Decisive Battles of the 20th Century. A long shot, a wild, desperate leap of logic. What was the most famous, most numerically significant battle for an American? D-Day, June 6, 1944. She typed 006144, access denied. Damn it, time was slipping away. The men from Sterling Forge were living in a world that had ceased to exist an hour ago. The public humiliation, the stock market crash, the catastrophic financial fallout when the news broke. It would be an apocalypse. She thought again. It was a satellite phone, a tool for serious, secure communication. Maybe the code was related to the hardware itself. She squinted at the back of the device. A model number, Iridium 95. She tried 9. Access denied. Frustration mounted. She was about to give up when she noticed something else about the crest on the phone case. A small motto in Latin beneath it, Disciplina Praesidium Civitatis. She knew enough Latin to translate, discipline, the guardian of the state. It was a military-sounding phrase. She thought back to the course name, Decisive Battles. What if it wasn't D-Day? What if it was something more obscure, something an academic would fixate on? The Battle of Midway, the turning point in the Pacific. That took place on June 4th, 1942. She typed 060414942. Click. The phone unlocked. A wave of vertigo washed over her. She was in. A sparse, utilitarian menu stared back at her. No social media, no games. Just call logs, messages, contacts, and a file manager. It felt like holding a military field radio, a direct line into a secret war. She ignored the personal messages, her conscience screaming at her to focus. She was looking for one thing only, a way to understand what had just happened. She opened the secure messaging app. The most recent conversation was with a contact labeled Internal Source. The last message was sent just hours ago. It was a single file attachment, GeoSurvey, Helios, Addendum, Final PDF. Below it was a single line of text. They won't be able to ignore this. It's a ticking bomb. Clara's blood ran cold. This was it. This was the supplementary report Greta Adler had mentioned. With a shaking finger, she tapped the file. It opened into a dense 30-page document filled with seismic charts, soil composition data, and metallurgical stress analyses. It looked utterly professional, devastatingly convincing. The report alleged that Sterling Forge's primary subcontractor had falsified soil stability tests along a critical 60-mile stretch of the proposed rail line. It claimed the steel alloy specified for the support pylons had a critical flaw that could lead to catastrophic failure under specific vibration frequencies. It cited data, presented graphs, and concluded that the Helios project, as designed, was a disaster waiting to happen. It was slick, technical, and terrifying. But to Clara, something felt wrong. Her mind, honed by years of analyzing forged historical documents in coded letters, wasn't just reading the content. It was seeing the structure. The document was too perfect. The metadata, the file's digital fingerprint, was completely blank, scrubbed clean. A legitimate report would be layered with dates, author information, revision histories. This one was a ghost. Then she saw it. Something no engineer would ever notice, but something a student of cryptography couldn't miss. At the bottom of each page, in the faint gray copyright line, was a string of text. Sterling Forge Internal Review, C, 2024. But the spacing was wrong. The kerning between certain letters was just a fraction of a millimeter off. C and H, G and B. It was a subtle, almost invisible imperfection. To her, it screamed. It was a form of steganography, a hidden message disguised as a typo. Her grandfather had taught her this. The best codes aren't the ones that are hard to break, he'd say. They're the ones no one ever sees in the first place. She scribbled the letters with the incorrect kerning on her napkin. CHAOS, GAMBIT. It wasn't a complex cipher. It was a signature, hidden in plain sight. Chaos Gambit. It meant nothing to her. She went back to Finch's contacts list. Who was internal source? There was no name, just a string of encrypted numbers. She was at another dead end. But who would want to sabotage Sterling Forge? A rival. On her own phone, she Googled, Julian Croft Sterling Forge biggest rival. The first result was a Forbes article from last year, The Old Bull versus the Young Wolf. Julian Croft's Sterling Forge locks. Horns with Silas Kane's Apex Dynamics. The article detailed a bitter, multi-year feud between the two companies. Kane was Croft's former protege, a brilliant engineer whom Croft had mentored, only for Kane to leave and start a competing firm, poaching top talent and using what many called ruthless, borderline unethical tactics to undercut his former boss. Kane was new money, a tech-driven disruptor. Croft was old industry, a titan of steel and sweat. It was a classic rivalry, amplified by personal betrayal. On a hunch, she searched for Silas Kane Apex Dynamics Company motto. The result hit her like a physical blow. The motto plastered all over their corporate website was Ordo ab Chao, order out of chaos, chaos gambit. It was all there. A rival CEO, a bitter protege, orchestrating an elaborate act of corporate sabotage. He hadn't just faked a report, he had branded it with his own twisted signature, a final insult to his old mentor. He had crafted the perfect weapon, a lie so technical and so terrifying that a cautious, honor-bound German firm would have no choice but to retreat. And he'd gotten it onto Arthur Finch's phone, making it look like it came from a concerned whistleblower within Sterling Forge itself. Greta Adler's words replayed in her mind. Information has been presented to our chairman. They had seen the report. The poison had done its work. Clara now held the entire conspiracy in her hands. She knew the deal was dead. She knew why it was dead. And she knew it was all built on an exquisitely crafted lie. But what could she possibly do? She was a waitress, her reality defined by shift schedules and aching feet. The world of Julian Croft and Silas Kane was another planet. Walking into Sterling Forge Tower was out of the question. Calling the main switchboard would be a futile gesture. She looked at the time on the satellite phone. 9:45 p.m. In Germany, it was nearly 5 a.m. The business day was about to begin. The news would break. The world would shift on its axis. Her mind raced, desperately sifting through her options. She couldn't get to Croft. She couldn't get to Finch. But maybe she could get to the people who had been deceived. She opened the phone's call log. The last incoming call was from Greta Adler. The number was right there, a direct line to the chief aide of the man who had just scuttled the deal of the century. It was a completely, utterly insane idea. To call the right hand of a German industrialist billionaire and tell her that her boss had been played for a fool by a fake engineering report. And who was the messenger? A waitress from a steakhouse in Chicago. They would assume she was a lunatic. They might even think she was part of the conspiracy, a clumsy attempt at a cover-up. She thought of her grandfather, of the quiet dignity with which he faced his own slow decline. He had spent his life decoding the messages of his country's enemies. She was holding an enemy's message right now. For 5 years, she had felt powerless, a victim of circumstance. But in this cramped, bleach-scented locker room, Holding this phone, she was not powerless. She held knowledge that could alter the course of industrial history. For the first time in a very long time, Clara Hale felt the ghost of the scholar, the analyst she was meant to be. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands shaking, and pressed the call button. The phone began to ring, the electronic tones bridging the 4,000 miles to Germany in an instant. The line rang 3 times, each tone a hammer blow against the anvil of her ribs. She could hear Dominic yelling from the kitchen, "Hale, table 7 needs their check." She didn't move. The entire world had contracted to the phone in her hand, and the impossible gambit she was about to undertake. "Adler," the voice on the other end answered, clipped and alert. She was clearly already at her desk. Clara's throat was sandpaper. "Ms. Adler, my name is Clara Hale. We spoke a short while ago. I'm the waitress from the restaurant in Chicago." A long, frigid silence descended on the line. Clara could practically feel the wave of Teutonic disapproval radiating across the ocean. "Yes," Greta finally said, her tone making it clear this was an unwelcome intrusion. "I have already provided you with the message for Herr Finch. There is nothing more to be said." "Please," Clara said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it possessed. "Please do not hang up. I know how this is going to sound, but I have reason to believe Chairman Schmidt is making a $100 billion decision based on a sophisticated forgery. Based on a lie." Another silence, this one laced with undisguised disbelief. "Miss Hale, you are a waitress. You cannot possibly have any comprehension of the technical data involved. Our decision is final, and it is based on credible intelligence from a source within Sterling Forge." "Was that intelligence a PDF file titled Geosurvey Helios Addendum?" Clara countered, the word spilling out. "And did it contain a hidden watermark, a steganographic signature reading Chaos Gambit?" The silence that followed was entirely different. It was no longer dismissive. It was sharp, focused, and tinged with the metallic taste of shock. She had scored a direct hit on a target she wasn't even supposed to know existed. "How could you possibly know that?" Greta asked, her voice losing its icy composure for the first time, replaced by a guarded curiosity. "Because I am holding the phone it was sent to," Clara explained, speaking rapidly, building her case before the woman could shut her down. "And I know who sent it. It wasn't a whistleblower. It was an act of corporate sabotage by Sterling Forge's chief rival, Silas Kane of Apex Dynamics. His corporate motto is order out of chaos. Chaos Gambit is his signature. The document's metadata has been professionally scrubbed. The file is a ghost. It's a fabrication, Miss Adler, designed to prey on your chairman's reputation for caution and precision." She laid it all out. The motive, the history of betrayal between Croft and Kane, the subtle clues within the document that pointed to its fraudulent nature. She spoke not as a waitress but as the analyst she was trained to be, presenting her thesis, connecting the disparate pieces of evidence, constructing an argument that was as logical as it was unbelievable. "Mr. Croft and Mr. Finch are completely unaware that the deal has been canceled," Clara pleaded, her voice now raw with a desperate sincerity. "They have no idea why. They are walking into their offices in a few hours believing they are on the verge of the greatest triumph of their careers. You canceled based on a lie, and they have not even been given the courtesy of a chance to defend their own work, their own honor." She had chosen the word deliberately. Honor. For a full minute, the only sound was the faint hum of the transatlantic connection. Greta Adler was processing, weighing the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the situation against the undeniable, specific, and secret details the American waitress was providing. A stranger had no right to know any of this. "What you are alleging is an accusation of the highest order," Greta said, her voice now measured, the professional returning, but with a new layer of caution. "We have our own verification protocols. Decisions of this magnitude are not made lightly. And your protocols were brilliantly exploited," Clara insisted, "by a man who knows Julian Croft's weaknesses because he helped build his strengths. Please, I am not asking you to reverse the decision. I am simply asking you to pause it, to give Mr. Croft the chance to see the accusation against him and respond to it. An accusation he does not even know has been made. Is that not the honorable course of action? There it was again. Honorable. She could feel the word resonate across the thousands of miles of wire and ocean. There was more silence, but this time Clara could hear the faint, muffled sound of Greta speaking in rapid, urgent German to someone else in the room. Her heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. This was it. The moment her entire life, her entire forgotten education, had been leading to. Greta came back on the line. Her voice was transformed. It was all business, cold as steel. Miss Hale, what you say is compelling, if wildly irregular. We will not act on your word alone. However, the questions you raise demand a direct answer. Clara held her breath. You have 90 minutes, Greta stated. You have 90 minutes to have Julian Croft personally contact Chairman Schmidt's private office. He must be prepared to offer an immediate and unequivocal refutation of the specific claims made in the geotechnical addendum. If we do not hear from him by 6:30 our time, the original decision will be made public, and we will sever all communication permanently. Do you understand? Yes, Clara breathed, a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Yes, I understand. I am texting the direct private number for Chairman Schmidt's chief of staff to this device. It is to be used one time only. 90 minutes, Miss Hale. The line went dead. A second later, the satellite phone buzzed. A new text message had appeared on the screen. It contained a German phone number and a simple, stark message. 90 Minuten. Clara stared at the screen, her mind a whirlwind. She had bought them 90 minutes. She had pried open a door that had been sealed with concrete and steel. Now came the truly impossible part. Finding a billionaire who had no idea his empire was on fire, and convincing him to make the most important phone call of his life, all on the word of the woman who had served him his steak. And the clock was ticking down. The world outside the steakhouse's employee locker room was the deep velvety black of a Midwestern night. The city was quieting down, but for Clara, the world had never been louder. The only light was the cold, green-tinged glow of Arthur Finch's satellite phone. The clock on the wall read 10:17 p.m. The 90-minute ultimatum was a countdown to annihilation. With the time difference, the axe would fall in just under an hour and a half. The cramped, windowless room, usually a refuge from the restaurant's demands, now felt like a prison cell. The air, thick with the scent of industrial cleaner, felt heavy, hard to breathe. Her first panicked thought was to call 911 to report an act of corporate terrorism. She dismissed it instantly. They wouldn't dispatch a SWAT team for a bad business deal. They'd send a patrol car with 2 skeptical officers who would likely think she was having a psychotic break. No, the only way through was the fortress itself. Sterling Forge Tower, a black monolith of glass and steel on Wacker Drive, designed with the specific purpose of repelling the outside world, especially people like her. Her hands, clammy with sweat, fumbled with her own phone as she looked up the main switchboard number. She took a deep breath, attempting to summon a voice of authority she hadn't used since her last graduate seminar. Sterling Forge Industries, this is Tiffany. How may I direct your call? The voice was so polished and serene it sounded synthesized. I need to speak with Julian Croft. It's an emergency, Clara said, trying to inject a note of executive-level urgency into her voice. I'm sorry, Mr. Croft is not available, Tiffany replied, her voice a pleasant, unbreachable shield of corporate protocol. Would you care to leave a message? This cannot wait for a message, Clara insisted, her voice rising with a tremor of panic. It is a time-sensitive matter regarding the final implementation of Project Helios. She deployed the code name like a battering ram, hoping it would shatter the procedural wall. It barely made a scratch. I understand, ma'am. All inquiries concerning Project Helios can be directed to our Strategic Communications Office. Please hold while I transfer you. No, don't transfer me. You don't, Clara pleaded, but it was too late. The soulless, looping strings of a generic corporate symphony filled her ear. She was on hold, trapped in a Muzak-filled purgatory while a $100 billion empire bled out. Panic began to constrict her chest. Every second she spent listening to this bland orchestra was a second Julian Croft marched closer to a chasm he could not see. She jabbed the end call button and redialed, her mind racing. The truth was useless. A well-constructed lie was a master key. A different operator answered. Sterling Forge, this is Michael. Clara didn't hesitate. I was just disconnected, she snapped, her voice now sharp with calculated irritation. I need to be put through to Arthur Finch's office immediately. My name is Dr. Albright from Northwestern Memorial. It's regarding an urgent update on his daughter's condition. It was a monstrous lie. Using a man's child, weaponizing a parent's deepest terror, made her feel nauseous. But she pictured the thousands of jobs, the colossal project, the legacy of a man she'd only just met, all about to be vaporized by Silas Kane's treachery. Her lie, she reasoned, was a battlefield triage, a necessary evil to prevent a greater catastrophe. The operator's tone shifted instantly from corporate drone to one of deep human concern. Oh, of course, doctor. I'm so sorry. One moment, please. I'm patching you directly to his executive assistant, Maria. Seconds later, a new voice, warm and professional, came on the line. Arthur Finch's office. This is Maria. Maria, this is Dr. Albright, Clara said, her heart pounding a frantic, guilty rhythm. I must speak with him now. It's a critical family emergency. Oh my goodness, Maria said, her voice filled with genuine distress. Doctor, I'm so sorry, but Mr. Finch is in the final Helios briefing with Mr. Croft on the executive floor. The entire 80th floor is on full communications lockdown. It's a clean room protocol. No phones, no tablets, no outside signals in or out until the briefing concludes. It's standard procedure to prevent any potential leaks before a major signing. A clean room, a sealed tomb. It was a dead end more absolute than she could have possibly imagined. They were in a soundproof, signal-proof, gilded cage of their own making, celebrating a victory that had already been turned into a historic rout. Meanwhile, 80 floors above the city, inside that very clean room, the atmosphere was thick with triumph. The massive obsidian conference table reflected the skyline like a dark, still lake. Julian Croft stood at its head, not with a glass of champagne, that would be for the morning, but with a glass of mineral water, which he held aloft like a scepter. To Helios, he said, his voice resonating with a deep paternal pride. To 5 years of work, of fighting, of believing when others said it was impossible. Tomorrow we don't just sign a contract. We begin to rebuild the industrial heart of this nation. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his most trusted lieutenants. I've had betrayals in my past. Men I trusted who chose greed over loyalty. It made me hard. It made me distrustful. But this team, you have restored a measure of my faith. You have delivered. Thank you. A murmur of here, here, and the soft clinking of glasses filled the room. Arthur Finch, seated to Croft's right, felt a wave of relief so profound it was almost dizzying. They had done it. They were giants, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet had already turned to quicksand. The spell was shattered when the heavy soundproof doors slid open with a soft hiss. Croft's personal assistant, a woman in her 60s named Eleanor, who had been with him for 40 years and guarded him like a dragon, stepped inside. Her face was a pale, grim mask. Her mere presence was a violation of the lockdown so extreme that a stunned silence instantly fell over the room. She walked directly to Croft, ignoring the bewildered stares of the vice presidents, and whispered urgently in his ear. The assembled team watched as the blood drained from Julian Croft's face. His faint smile evaporated, replaced by a look of cold, sharp disbelief. What do you mean, no comment? He hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Miller Stahl's press office just released a flash statement to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Reihe and the Wall Street Journal's European edition. Eleanor whispered back, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly as she held out a tablet. It states they are reevaluating their North American strategic partnerships and have no further comment on any pending joint ventures. Our contacts in Berlin say it's boardroom code for the deal is dead. They are not answering any of our direct lines. It's a total blackout. The tablet was passed to Finch, who read the headline and turned the color of bone china. What? That's impossible. We received the final green light from their legal team this morning. Chaos erupted. The serene triumph of moments before shattered into 1,000 shards of confused, frantic energy. Executives scrambled for their phones only to remember they were useless bricks inside the clean room. Croft's face had become a mask of glacial fury. This wasn't a last-minute negotiation tactic. This was a public execution. "Get me Gunther Schmidt on the line," he roared, his voice bouncing off the glass walls. "Get his aide. Get his chauffeur. Get me someone who can tell me what in God's name is happening. Now." Down in the locker room, Clara was facing her own despair. She had failed. The thought was a cold, jagged stone in her gut. She stared at the countdown on the satellite phone. 38 minutes remaining. She had hit a wall of steel and protocol. In desperation, she scrolled through Finch's contacts again. It was a list of corporate titans, senators, and engineers. None of them would listen to her. Then her eyes caught on a name filed under the Helios Project, Junior Team Group, David Chen, metallurgical analyst. His profile picture was of a young man who looked barely out of college, a safety helmet on his head and a proud, eager grin on his face. He didn't look cynical or jaded. He looked like someone who still believed in the project. The lowest rung on the corporate ladder, she thought, the one closest to the ground. Tapping his name, she found his direct office extension. It was a wild, desperate gambit, a 1 in a million shot. She dialed. It rang twice. A young, slightly hesitant voice answered. "David Chen." "David," Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent frequency that commanded attention. "My name is irrelevant. What is relevant is that you listen to me with extreme care. I have a message that must get to Julian Croft in the next 5 minutes, or Project Helios will be permanently terminated. I do not have time to explain who I am or how I know this. Your entire company has been the victim of a sophisticated corporate sabotage." "Who is this? How did you get this number? I can't just—" "Silas Kane," Clara cut in, using the name like a stun grenade. "Apex Dynamics. He fed the Germans a forged geotechnical report to kill the deal. They believed it. They are pulling out right now because of it. Everyone on your floor is celebrating a funeral. Now listen to me." There was a sharp, stunned intake of breath on the other end. "Oh my God," David whispered. "The whole floor is in chaos. We just got word something happened with the Germans. No one knows anything." "There is no time for chaos," Clara snapped, her own desperation forging her words into weapons. "The Germans have given me a 90-minute window to have Mr. Croft contact them directly. That window closes in 33 minutes. You are the only person who can get a message through. You need to get to the 80th floor right now." "But it's a lockdown. There's security at the door. They won't let me—" "Then you set off a fire alarm," Clara yelled, her voice cracking under the impossible strain. "Do you understand me, David? Take a pen. Write this down. You will walk up to Julian Croft and you will say this exact phrase: 'The chaos gambit has worked. Berlin is closing the door in 30 minutes. The proof is on Finch's phone.'" The chaos gambit," David repeated, his voice trembling as he scribbled. Okay. I'll try." Clara hung up. Her entire body was shaking. She had fired her last bullet. It was all in the hands of a junior analyst she would never meet. She slid down the grimy wall of the locker room, a universe away from the pandemonium she had just instigated 80 floors above. She looked at the timer on the phone. 29 minutes remaining. The boardroom on the 80th floor was a pressure cooker of impotent rage. Julian Croft paced the length of the room like a caged tiger. Then the soundproof doors burst open. David Chen, the young analyst, stood there, pale and breathless, clutching a notepad. 2 burly security guards were right behind him, trying to wrestle him back out. "Mr. Croft, sir," David yelled, his voice squeaking with terror. "A message. It's urgent." Croft shot him a look that could have cracked granite. "Young man, this had better be the most important sentence you ever utter in your entire life." "I don't know what it means, sir," David stammered, holding out the note. "A woman called. She said to tell you this exactly. The chaos gambit has worked. Berlin is closing the door in 30 minutes. The proof is on Finch's phone." The room fell dead silent. Croft snatched the note. He read the words, his pale blue eyes narrowing to slits. Chaos gambit. The name Silas Kane slammed into his mind like a freight train. He whirled on Arthur Finch. "Your phone! My phone, Finch said, his face a mask of dawning horror as he slapped his empty pockets. I don't have it. Dear God, I must have left it at the restaurant. In a single blinding flash, it all connected for Croft. Kane, the sabotage, the restaurant, the unknown woman, the phone. It was an impossible, insane sequence of events, but it was the only thing that made a shred of sense. Eleanor, Croft barked, get me the number for a restaurant, the Gilded Steer, now. To Finch, he commanded, check your tablet, your laptop, see if your messages are synced. Find the file this woman is talking about. While Eleanor frantically searched for the restaurant's number, Finch found the message on his tablet. He opened the PDF. The forged report filled the screen. My God, Finch whispered, his voice cracking. Julian, look at this. Croft scanned the first page, his face turning to stone. It was a masterful deception. At that exact moment, Eleanor handed him a phone with the Gilded Steer's main line already ringing. Dominic answered, annoyed. Gilded Steer. This is Julian Croft, he said, his voice imbued with an intensity that made the manager physically stand up straight. One of my men left a phone at your establishment. A woman, a waitress, has it. I need to speak to her. It is a matter of national economic importance. Yeah, hail, Dominic yelled. Phone! A moment later, Clara's trembling voice came on the line. Hello? This is Julian Croft, he said. Who is this? My name is Clara Hale. Ms. Hale, you have 2 minutes to tell me exactly what I need to do. You need to call this number, Clara said, reading the direct line Greta had texted her. You need to tell Chairman Schmidt that the geotechnical report is a forgery created by Silas Kane to sabotage the project. Tell him the proof is a steganographic signature in the document itself, and that the original file was sent to Mr. Finch's phone from an untraceable source. Croft scribbled the number down. He didn't waste time with questions. He didn't ask how she knew. The sheer impossible specificity of her knowledge was all the proof he needed. The conviction in her voice was absolute. Thank you, Ms. Hale, he said, a note of profound, bewildered respect in his voice. Stay where you are. He hung up and turned to his team. Get me a secure line to Germany. Now. With less than 20 minutes to spare, Julian Croft was patched through to Chairman Schmidt's chief of staff. He did not yell or plead. He spoke with the cold, methodical precision of a master strategist, laying out the details of the corporate espionage. He explained Kane's motive, the forged report, the hidden signature. He had his team email a time-stamped screenshot of the file from Finch's synced tablet as irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. He was fighting for his legacy, and his words were forged from steel. 2 hours later, Clara was mechanically polishing the last of the silverware. The restaurant was empty. The symphony long since faded into a deep and resonant silence. She was a hollowed-out shell, running on the fumes of adrenaline. She had no idea what had happened after that call. For all she knew, they had failed. The bell above the main door chimed softly. Julian Croft walked in. He was alone. His suit jacket was off, his tie was loosened, and he looked a decade older. But the glacial fury in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, contemplative exhaustion. He walked directly to her table. Clara Hale, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she replied, her voice small. He slid into booth 12, the same booth where the world had tilted on its axis. The deal is back on, he said, his voice quiet, heavy. Chairman Schmidt sends his profound apologies for the misunderstanding and his admiration for the unorthodox methods through which the truth was delivered. Clara could only nod, the words not yet forming. We spent the last hour on a conference call with our legal team and a digital forensics unit, Croft continued, his pale blue eyes studying her intently. They confirmed everything you deduced. The scrubbed metadata, the steganography. It was Kane. You didn't just save a deal, Ms. Hale. You handed me the sword I will use to dismantle my greatest enemy. He paused, leaning forward slightly. I had my people look into you, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. University of Chicago, top of your class, dropped out 5 years ago. Clara flinched, feeling as if he had just read the most painful page of her life story. My grandfather got sick. I know, he said gently. My team is very good. I also know that you unlocked my executive's secured satellite phone, accessed confidential corporate data, and impersonated a physician to breach my company's security protocols. By every legal definition, I should have you arrested." Clara's stomach plummeted. "But," he went on, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been a smile, "you also demonstrated more intellectual rigor, raw courage, and strategic initiative in 3 hours than my entire 20-man risk assessment department shows in a year. A mind like yours is a terrible thing to waste polishing silver." He slid a heavy, cream-colored business card across the table. It was his personal card, with only his name and a private number embossed on it. "I'm not going to offer you a job. That would be too easy. A handout. And I don't get the sense you're a person who takes handouts." He stood up, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire empty restaurant. "But my family's foundation has a grant for exceptional individuals whose educational paths have been involuntarily disrupted. A representative will be in touch tomorrow to arrange for the full, retroactive payment of all of your grandfather's medical care. They will also be funding a full scholarship for you to complete your graduate degree at any university you choose." Clara stared at him, speechless, as tears began to well in her eyes. "But why?" she finally managed to whisper. Julian Croft looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw not the industrial titan or the corporate general, but the man he was underneath. Because people like Silas Kane believe the world is won through deception and treachery. They think honor is a weakness. Tonight, a waitress in a steakhouse proved him wrong. That's an investment worth making. He paused at the door. "When you have your degree, Ms. Hale, call the number on that card. My door will be open, but you have to be the one to walk through it." He turned and left, disappearing into the Chicago night. Clara stood alone in the quiet glow of the empty restaurant. A bulky satellite phone, a heavy business card, and the sudden breathtaking promise of a future she thought had been buried forever rested on the table before her. The crushing weight of an ordinary life had, in one extraordinary night, finally been lifted. She hadn't just saved a deal. She had decrypted her own soul.